The $12 trillion lie, financialized geography. Here's the part nobody wants on a prospectus. The Cerrado isn't just a landscape, it's a stacked balance sheet. Start with soy. Beans become meal, meal becomes protein, chicken, pork, eggs, tofu, moving through integrators from Guyana to Guangdong. Upstream sit crushers and feed mills that live on throughput. Downstream are buyers who can swap brands but not biology. Now layer the scaffolding. Futures on Chicago screens, currency hedges in Sao Paulo, shipping contracts pinned to draft assumptions, fertilizer credit timed to harvests, and insurance priced off yesterday's weather. Every line item quietly assumes the groundwater pantry pays out through August. Money treats hydrology like background music. Banks extend working capital against projected yields and forward sales. Traders pre-sell cargoes months out, booking barge slots on interior rivers sized for normal water. Loan covenants include transport KPIs that assume drafts will hold and plants will crush on cadence. If flows thin, those KPIs wobble. A barge that can't load full pushes demurrage into cash flow. A plant that idles for lack of meal presses EBITDA against debt service. Nothing illegal, just leverage colliding with lower base flow. ESG made the blind spot worse. Sustainability-linked loans and certificates zeroed in on deforestation and carbon intensity. Important, but incomplete. You can pass a canopy test and still compact soils, drain fields fast, and break the vertical pathways that refill aquifers. The label reassures investors. The aquifer doesn't care. A farm can glow green on a satellite in January and give you silence in a creek by late August. The mispricing shows up in how insurance and credit model risk. Crop policies lean on historical yield bands and weather indices, but hydrologic lag bends that curve. 2 decent rains after 2 thin recharge seasons don't fix a missing pantry. Indemnities lag the real hit. Basis risk eats margins, while debt service still arrives on the same calendar. Banks respond by tightening covenants or lifting rates. Equipment leases get renegotiated on worse collateral, fields with less late-season certainty. Follow the dependency abroad. Europe's poultry and pork sectors rely on Brazilian meal blended into rations. China's hog integrators tune feed conversion around steady soy flows. North African budgets breathe easier when feed costs stay tame. They didn't sign water agreements with the Cerrado, but they might as well have. When base flow shortens, transport costs rise, crushers juggle, and regional meal prices jump. Integrators hedge some exposure, not all. Weekly procurement beats quarterly strategy. Here's a micro story. A mid-tier exporter refinanced on a sustainability-linked loan, traceability locked, no nuclearing clauses tight. Then a dry shoulder season shrank drafts on the Madeira. Their barge program slipped. They rerouted to rail at premiums, paid overtime at terminals, and watched a covenant tied to throughput creep toward breach. The paperwork was clean. The river was. Meanwhile, sovereign risk whispers through spreadsheets. Hydropower depends on shoulder season inflows. When those sag, planners dispatch thermal, tariffs nudge up, industrial output ticks down, and bond desks widen spreads by a few basis points. Not a crisis, just an irritant that compounds. Export receipts wobble as basis blows out inland. Currency hedges cover price, not time. Refinancing windows feel a little tighter. Investors thought redundancy solved it. Northern Arc ports rose to complement Santos. More rail corridors promised resilience. On a map, it looks diversified. In a dry year, the constraint is the same everywhere. Not enough late-season water to move bulk at scale. The system's fragility isn't a single choke point, it's synchronized thinning. Optional routes share the same pantry. The $12 trillion number isn't a tidy ledger. It's the interlocked value at risk when a global protein machine assumes baseflow permanence. Think land values that embed infinite wells, plant valuations that assume steady crush, logistics built on drafts, and sovereign credit leaning on commodity cadence. Add supermarkets, school meal programs, and subsidy budgets downstream. Trillions ride on a Savanna's roots, keeping pores open. Pricing power shifts fast when water shows up in contracts. A trader who can certify headwater resilience, actual flow duration curves, not marketing, commands a premium and better vessel windows. A crusher with spotty supply pays demurrage and loses turn. A farm with verified corridors gets cheaper credit. A neighbor without them pays a risk spread. Insurance turns from weather to hydrology. Deductibles fall if gauges hold. Exclusions kick in if wells draw down without restoration. Here's the tell that the market is waking up. Banks start asking for water audits in borrowing bases, stream permanence in August, corridor continuity, shallow aquifer trends. Covenants add triggers. If a headwater gauge drops below threshold for consecutive weeks, borrowers fund corridor planting or face a rate step-up. Producers groan, then do the math. A quarter point costs more than seedlings and a weekend with augers. What nobody priced was the lag. Under native cover, rain became storage with a delay that smoothed seasons. Remove the living plumbing, and you still get a few harvests that look fine while the pantry empties. Capital locks in on those early years, new terminals, bigger plants, deeper debt. Then the cadence slips, drafts shrink, pumps run hotter, shoulder months thin. In boardrooms, the question changes from what's our yield risk to how many dry weeks can our covenant survive. The lie was never that the Cerrado could feed the world. It did, and it can. The lie was that it could do it forever on a broken sponge, with cheap capital and risk priced as if roots didn't matter. The fix isn't quarterly. It's corridors, recharge, and contracts that pay for August. And if that sounds soft, watch what happens when a river writes a penalty clause in real time. Underground collapse, the roots can't reach. To see what went wrong, you have to kneel in the dirt. The Cerrado's native plants evolved with roots that dive meters down, threading soil like rebar and holding open the pathways that let rain move from storm to storage. Those roots didn't just drink, they engineered. Their channels stitched surface water to deeper horizons, turning wet season bursts into dry season lifelines. When you remove that living plumbing, the ground flips from absorb to shed. The first seasons look fine. Then the calendar starts shaving days off August. Clearing begins the quiet break. Heavy machinery compresses the top few centimeters. Traffic seals pause. Grading flattens microrelief that once slowed flow. Drainage ditches protect crops from ponding but hurry water sideways. Rains that used to soak now sprint. You still see a green flush in the wet months. What you lose is the slow, cool seep that keeps springs humming. Baseflow is a boring word. It's also the difference between pumps working and pumps sucking air. Farmers feel the shift in the shoulder weeks. The shallow lens that used to carry them through June into early July arrives later and leaves earlier. A manager who used to switch to the deeper bore in July flips the breaker in mid-June. The power bill climbs. The headgate conversation changes from "when do we irrigate" to "how long can we hold pressure?" A rancher checks the hillside spring his family has used for decades and finds damp gravel where there was water last year. Streams tell on the basin next. Perennial creeks slip to seasonal. That shift reads like semantics until you realize every intake, every right, every ecological clock was tuned to always running. Intermittence means fish stranded, riparian plants stressed, and pumps idling at noon. The first time it happens, people blame the year. The second time, they blame bad luck. By the third, they quietly buy longer intake pipes and hope the neighbors don't notice. Soil structure gives away the plot up close. Under native cover, macropores, those fat, continuous channels from root and worm, move water quickly downward. After years of traffic and shallow-rooted covers, crust forms. 1 hour downpour becomes a hammer on a plate. Water sheets, gathers, and cuts. Gullies lengthen where harvesters exit fields. Even hill can disappoint if it's just less traffic without deep root substitutes to rebuild vertical highways. Cover crops help when they're timed to cool storms and have taproots that actually pierce pans. The hidden master variable is the recharge window. Not all rains matter equally. You need cooler storm sequences and long enough intervals for infiltration to outrun runoff. Strip shade, raise surface temperatures, and harden the top horizon, and the same annual rainfall yields less storage. 2 good storms after a thin year don't refill the pantry. The basin starts the dry season lower, and the drop shows up where contracts meet valves. Evidence arrives as small failures in the wrong month. A municipal well drops below the intake in late July, not mid-August. A hydro per dispatch plan writes in extra thermal because the shoulder inflow curve sagged. A feed mill logs more days of low-pressure supply. A research team flags declining dry season discharge at a headwater gauge and gets told the record isn't long enough to count. Meanwhile, producers run an arms race with geology. Drill deeper, add horsepower, widen the straw. It works until it doesn't. Here's the part that stings. Every meter down costs more energy. Pump efficiency falls as lifts rise. Diesel spikes or tariff bumps turn water into a line item that crowds out maintenance. Some operators keep up by cutting elsewhere. Others miss a note and watch a field desiccate a week too soon. The aquifer took years to stabilize under deep roots. It doesn't forgive quick withdrawals on a thinner recharge. A micro-story says more than a chart. A cooperative's agronomist keeps a pocket notebook. In 2015, he wrote, June 28 switch to deep bore. In 2019, June 17. In 2023, June 9. He's not dramatic, he just circles the dates. The pattern is a staircase going the wrong way. Downstream, the timing mismatch punishes infrastructure. Barges can't argue with draft. 10 centimeters lost over a season translates to lighter loads and more trips. Elevators fill as river cadence slips. Rail helps, but drought pushes more grain onto the same tracks that move everything else. The bottleneck isn't a single port, it's a landscape that stopped saving water. None of this needs a villain. Incentives paid for speed, fast drainage to protect seedlings, flat fields for machinery, calendars that maximize yield. Agronomy solved chemistry with lime and phosphorus. Finance solved scale with credit and terminals. Hydrology asked for patience and roots. It lost. There's a path back, but it refuses shortcuts. Deep-root surrogates in rotations, real no-till with traffic control riparian buffers that are 30 meters of shade and litter, not 10 meters of compliance. Reopen vertical flow, cool the surface, and stretch the recharge window. The payoff doesn't clap in quarter one. It shows up when a spring holds a week longer in year 2, then 2 weeks in year 3. That's base flow returning. Until then, the collapse stays underground, writing itself into energy bills, draft restrictions, and protein prices. The roots can't reach, neither can the water, and the market is about to learn what that feels like when the calendar turns to August. The 3 shocks by minute 5. Shock 1 arrives like a skipped heartbeat, and then a day 0. At 6:00 a.m., a town opens its valves and nothing comes. Taps hiss, then cough air. By 9:15, the mayor stands beside a dry intake pipe, microphone shaking, announcing tanker rotations and a 2-bucket limit per household. In the square, a line snakes past the statue and into the sun. A nurse in scrubs holds 2 jugs and checks her watch. Clinic starts in 20 minutes. This wasn't a freak outage. A headwater that ran every month missed August. The next year, it missed July too. Across the plateau, clusters of perennial creeks turned seasonal together. Municipal intakes were engineered around minimum flows that no longer exist. Hydro per dispatch counted on shoulder season trickles that didn't arrive. Fish stranded in warm puddles. Groundwater-dependent communities timed life to always and ran into not today. Intermittence unthreaded all of it, synchronized by a basin-wide squeeze in recharge windows. Stakes got human fast. A factory paused sterilization mid-cycle because pressure dipped to 0 for 19 minutes. A reservoir operator punched in thermal backup to cover a flat inflow curve. School principals sent texts, "Bring labeled water bottles tomorrow." The phrase, dry season management, turned into weekly crisis calendar. Shock 2 hits the dinner plate, quiet then sharp. In a supermarket aisle, a parent stares at the dairy and egg case and does math out loud. Milk or eggs, not both. Meal is the hinge, soy to feed to protein. When streams thin, crushers shorten shifts, barge drafts cut loads, and regional meal prices jump. Integrators hedge price, not absence. Eggs move first, ration tweaks show up in days. A week later, broiler chicken stickers change overnight. Pork grinds higher over months. Tofu doesn't rescue anyone, it rides the same soybean. Households switch cuts, stretch stews, and put 1 carton back. Poorer families cut fastest, and that cut is not taste, it's growth for kids who needed those proteins. Timing does the damage. Insurance pays months later. Credit lines renew quarterly. Feed procurement is weekly, plants live day to day. A mill manager staggers shifts because meal is late, then calls growers to hold birds longer. Feed conversion worsens, space tightens, stress rises. Supermarkets sit on prices for a weekend to keep traffic, then lift every tag on Monday. The index will call it inflation. Shoppers call it a choice they didn't have. Shock 3 is the logistics choke you can see from space. A satellite pass catches a gray ribbon of river lined with motionless dots. Hundreds of barges grounded in a low water queue that doesn't move for days. Lose 10 to 20 centimeters of draft inland and everything compacts. Barges light load, more trips, less tonnage, higher unit costs. Queues lengthen. A Panamax misses its berth at Santarém or Santos and demurrage starts ticking. Rail takes overflow until drought pushes all cargo onto the same tracks, already carrying ore and containers. One washout on a feeder road spills trucks across kilometers of shoulder. Elevators fill because barges can't clear, bins heat, quality discounts creep, and the next harvest looms. Link the three and the system reveals itself. Seasonal streams don't just inconvenience fish, they force taps to silence, factories to stagger, and power to get pricier. That cost rides into meal, lifts protein prices, and tightens household budgets. At the same time, low drafts choke the export pulse, blowing out basis and draining cash at terminals. A trader pays rail premiums while a plant trims shifts and a city drafts rationing plans. None of this required catastrophe, just one thin recharge year layered on a thinner one. 3 days earlier, something strange occurred upstream. Origin of the lie. Then it spread. 1970s, 1990s. To understand how a food empire ended up resting on a shrinking sponge, go back to the 1970s policy labs. On paper, the Cerrado looked hostile: acidic soils, aluminium toxicity, low phosphorus, and dry seasons that scared investors. Then agronomists cracked the chemistry. Lime neutralized acidity. Phosphorus turned stubborn soils productive. Breeders tuned soybeans to warm savannas. Trial plots that had failed for decades suddenly yielded. Conquest of the Cerrado went from slogan to budget line. Yields climbed, credit followed. The frontier myth got an address. Cheap loans stacked behind the science. Development banks offered soft terms pegged to hectares converted and tonnage moved. Subsidies rewarded export orientation. Roads, silos, and later railheads rolled out on political calendars. The message was simple: clear, correct, plant and ship. Agronomy fixed what you could see. Nutrients and pH finance fixed what you could measure, throughput and price. Hydrology, the slow variable, got averaged away. The early wins were intoxicating. Farmers could transform a field in a season, spread lime, apply pea, plant cultivars tuned to daylight and heat, and watch a once sparse plot turn into cash. Crushers sprang up near railheads. Traders stitched letters of credit to futures hedges and booked ocean freight months out. A cadence took shape: plant, harvest, move, hedge, repeat, clean enough to sell to ministries and Wall Street. The lag that would matter later hid inside those victories. Here's where the map learned to lie convincingly. Satellites saw greenness. Greenness meant healthy to buyers. Soy in January looked vibrant from orbit. Planted pasture also read as green. Riparian strips, thin but present, calmed auditors scanning polygons. None of it captured what the Savanna's native roots had done underground: keep pores open, cool soils, and connect storms to storage. A landscape could glow on a screen and still shed rain sideways in March, then run dry in August. Policy lock-in hardened the narrative. Success was counted in hectares and export tonnage. Agencies wrote rules for average years. Hydromet networks watched big rivers and big dams. Small headwaters got thin budgets. When a spring shortened or a creek went intermittent, it was logged as weather, not design. Emergency orders patched symptoms. Temporary intake extensions, relaxed truck limits, power tariff tweaks. None of it rebuilt vertical flow. Finance built commitment devices that were hard to unwind. Northern rail spurs, inland terminals, blending hubs, and export berths created political constituencies. Each new asset raised the cost of caution. You don't spend billions to slow down. Loan covenants enshrined cadence, minimum throughput, plant utilization, delivery windows, anchored to decades that looked wetter on paper than they were underground. Hydrology hadn't failed, it hadn't been asked. Meanwhile, the world trained its appetite on Brazil. China's hog sector grew into rations calibrated for soy meal. Europe blended Brazilian meal into poultry and pork. North Africa's subsidy math breathed easier with affordable feed. Every year the pipeline hit its marks, confidence thickened. The Cerrado was stable, scalable, and self-correcting. ESG arrived in the 199s and put canopy at the center. Zero deforestation became the gatekeeper metric. Important, yes, but incomplete. A farm could protect trees and still crush soil, drain fields fast, and shorten recharge windows. The audits nodded. The springs didn't. A detail everyone missed sat in time. Under native cover, rain didn't become river right away. It became storage, then slow release. Clear the deep-rooted lattice, compact the top horizon, and the pantry keeps feeding you for a while. Early harvests look great because you're drawing on yesterday's savings. Capital notices success, not lag. Credit expands. Terminals scale. Plant investments assume tomorrow looks like the best of yesterday. Then annual rain lands on hotter soil with fewer vertical pathways. Infiltration misses the deeper layers. Dry season flows shave days, then weeks. The gauges, where they existed, whispered a warning that spreadsheets couldn't hear. Micro moments told the truth before the models did. A co-op agronomist in the late 198s wrote that a hillside spring near trial plots quit for 2 weeks most winters. He chalked it up to rainfall variance and moved on to a fertilizer response curve that won him funding. A municipal engineer noted low-pressure episodes in August and blamed urban growth, not upstream compaction. A terminal manager logged more days of light-loaded barges and called it a river quirk. Each note was a clue. Together, they were a pattern. By the 199s, the machine was locked. Agronomy solved chemistry, finance solved scale, logistics solved distance, and marketing solved doubt. The Cerrado had been conquered in the only ledger that mattered: exports. The paradox never made the slide deck. Deep roots had built a water economy that the new economy was quietly spending down. And because the damage lived underground and paid out as delays, premiums, and pressure drops months later, it didn't look like a culprit. It looked like weather. What the 197s to 199s era invented, the 202s would have to renegotiate. Growth that assumed infinite recharge, risk-priced as if baseflow were permanent, and a global protein train that ran on rails and rivers powered by roots. The lie wasn't evil, it was omission, and the bill was scheduled for August. Urban thirst, cities downstream start to blink. While the frontier scaled, cities downstream began to blink. Brasilia once felt insulated, headwaters in every direction, reservoirs with comfortable margins, engineers who trusted the average. Then the shoulder seasons thinned. Utility managers started counting dependable intake days the way traders count basis points. A decade ago, they planned smooth into August. Now they sketch scenarios where July wobbles and August needs rationing. They rotate pumps, drop intakes, and pin hopes on a cool front that lingers long enough to open a recharge window. Goiânia felt it on the factory floor before households did. Pressure dips arrived at awkward moments, 19 minutes at midday, enough to scramble cleaning cycles and force rework. Procurement wrote quiet memos, expect intermittent intake constraints in Q3. Nobody wanted headlines. Everyone saw the trend. Hospitals rehearsed 48-hour water cuts like fire drills. The drill ended fine. The invoice for standby tankers came back double last year's price. A procurement officer circled the number and wrote one word: trend. Hydropower set the rhythm, and that rhythm stumbled. Dispatch planners used to count on shoulder inflows to bridge tariffs.